Our group is analyzing a football throw. In a 1996 study, authors Knudsen and Morrison said that the overarm throw has been a critical fundamental movement pattern for many sports. The purpose of our analysis is to compare the subject's movement patterns to the correct movement patterns. By analyzing the movements, we can determine the subject's risk for injury. Overhand throwing in football has been responsible for 77.4% of quarterback injuries, according to a Barnes 2004 study. Also, as stated in a study written by Andrews in 2000, the overhand throwing motion is a complex system of movements that require flexibility, strength, coordination, and neuromuscular efficiency in the upper and lower extremities and the torso. So we were going to start here with her in the stance phase, which is the first phase in a football throw. One of the first things to notice is the direction her body is facing. What we want to see is the feet, hips, and trunk all pointing in a direction perpendicular to the direction of the throw. We see here that her body is actually in a direction that is about 45 degrees between the perpendicular and the direction of throw. This reduces the amount of rotation she is able to create later on in the throw, which results in a decrease in the power and velocity of the throw. The next things to look at are the knees and the trunk. Here, her knees are only barely flexed, if flexed at all. However, her trunk is in a correct erect position. Her arms are another thing she's actually doing well for the most part in this phase. If you notice, her forearms, elbows, and ball make a triangle with the elbows and ball as the 3 points of the triangle. This is actually what we would want to see, as it puts the throwing hand in the correct cocked position. We would like the ball to be held a little bit higher up the chest, but other than that, her arms look good in this position. Now we are on to the second phase of throwing a football. This phase can either be entitled the cocking phase or loading phase of the throw. What we want to see is most of the weight resting on the back leg with the front shoulder and hips still in a closed position. However, as you can see here, her front shoulder and hip have already started to open even more than they were in the stance phase. Looking back at her throwing arm, there is one major thing missing. That is the external rotation of the shoulder. This would cause the ball to be held up above the shoulder at head level. There is little external rotation, so the ball stays down around the shoulder. However, she does have an L shape in her elbow, or flexion of 90 degrees, which is what we want to see. We would also want to see the elbow just slightly higher. It is close, but just a little low. The final thing to note is that her front leg and elbow have started what we would like to see happen closer to the beginning of the next phase. Her leg has begun to step, and her elbow has already started initiating trunk rotation by being thrown down and back. Now we'll watch this phase happen in slow motion. Moving on to the third of 4 phases. This phase is known as the acceleration or release phase. She does a decent job in this phase. We can't see as much here in the frozen version of this phase because of the blurred arm and ball. But what we would want to see, and I believe she does this pretty well, is the index finger to be the last portion of her body to touch the ball. Another thing we want to see in this phase is the pushing off of the back leg, and by the end of this phase, the front leg bearing most of the body weight. And we do see this some, but again, as said before, she started pushing off and stepping with the front leg during the previous phase, or a little early in the throw than what we would want to see. One thing we do see is she does get some trunk rotation during this phase, which is one of the key things to getting power and velocity into your throw. Finally, the last thing to note about this phase is her throwing arm elbow at the end of the phase. By this point, we would want to see pretty much full extension at the elbow, and she doesn't really get there. You can see this even more in the slow motion in just a second. So as we watch the slow motion of this phase, notice how her front foot has already begun to step out and her front arm has already begun moving in the backward and down motion. This has opened up her shoulder, causing her to lose some rotational movement, also causing a loss in power. We want to see this step and arm movement start at the beginning of this phase, and she started it in the previous phase. Now we have moved into the final phase of the throw, the follow-through phase. She has done a decent job in this phase. If we were to continue on in the video, we might see her legs swing around a bit more, but I don't believe she ever got it to the desired position, which is parallel with her front leg, with both feet then pointing toward the target. Her trunk is slightly flexed, which is what we want to see, and her throwing arm has come across her body. The only other thing that we would like to see here is that the throwing arm comes down a little more and a little less straight across her body. But if we fix some of the things in the earlier phases, we would probably see this happen anyways. So to recap, she actually presents most of the components of a good football throw. A lot of the components need some tweaks, but they are still present. One of the biggest things that needs work is her sequencing. For example, her front leg and front elbow movement that start the trunk rotation come a little bit early in the motion. If we could get the sequencing down, her ability to complete a good throw would increase dramatically, and the other things could be fixed later on.